Thank you, Sherry. That was pretty awesome. I am really nervous right now. It's like, how do I follow you guys? Like, thank you also, Lissa and Jeanne. My goodness. I should just walk away, you guys. It's like, you raised the bar too high. I'm going to bang my head. I'm like, what the heck? Um, I want to thank the Jerome Foundation and the National Endowment for the Arts for their support of this program and it's making it possible for me to be here. Um, I want to thank Sherry and the Loft staff for making me being here kind of fantastic and working with these really awesome writers. I had a great day. I hope they did too. It's just been really cool hanging out with them. I got to go to a potluck last night. Yeah, life is good. I'm kind of blessed. I'm so, yeah, just so kind of blessed. Um, so I'm going to read a poem from Blood Ties and Brown Liquor. It's a book about my hometown, Milledgeville, Georgia, and sort of the history there and the history of the black folk there. And in order to sort of explore that history, I invented a character, this guy named Silas Wright, who was a generation older than the oldest living member of my family at the time of writing this book. And he was born in 1907, my character. And because I'm reading at the Loft, I'm going to read a poem about him learning to write his name. So I think that's kind of appropriate. Silas Wright, at age 7, 1914. Silas Wright follows a fish's wriggle in the shallows between reeds. He scribes the line in his tablet, as much pride in that line as a man in his son. He almost giggles. Still he goes on. The next letters come easy. With this, he'll have more than a mark to bind. Rambling across the page, again and again, in messy rows, on it flows, until he goes, a little off the page's edge. He smiles. He's surprised to hear, when his mouth opens, that's mine. And because he's my character, and I had to kind of figure out like how to give him a life, like what's he gonna be doing? Like he has to do things. He can't just be a name. I was like, he's gotta read. He's my character. He's gonna read some things, and so I decided he had to read this book that was published in the year that I decided he was going to be born. It's a book titled "The Life and Adventures of Nat Love," better known in cattle country as Deadwood Dick. It's it's a fantastic read, actually. It's this autobiography by this black cowboy, Nat Love, who was also known as Deadwood Dick, and it's a sort of three-stage book. The first like third of it is him talking about being born in 1856 in Kentucky and you know, learning how to ride a horse and being a slave and being like sort of that whole like the weird history of jockeys in America. Like he learned how to race, which we don't really think about. Like the first jockeys were black jockeys. At any rate, so slavery is abolished, and he decides to set out for the West and become a cowboy. And there's this crazy stories of like I, him roping trains and like all this nutty stuff, like crazy things. He was like this larger than life character, like most cowboys, right? And then the trains and it sort of affected the cattle drives, and so he had to become a Pullman porter. And that's a whole crazy another story, like involving like prize fighters that he got into arguments with, like because he wasn't just any old Pullman porter. Yeah, crazy. Yeah, yes, read this book. At any rate, okay, all right. At any rate, so there are parts of this. There's a passage from that book that's in here, And I think it'll be clear when I read it. Thank you, Mary. Hands, 1921. Silas's hands, not the creamy brown of hen's eggs like his father's, or the red brown of rust on a hoe like Benjamin's, but the golden brown of scuppernongs on the vine in late summer, the brown of oak leaves in late fall, hog-killing time. Hold open the life and adventures of Nat Love, better known in cattle country as Deadwood Dick, a man who has the hands of a slave, a cowboy, and a Pullman porter. Love's hands, not the brown of tobacco leaves, sun-cured, hung in the barn, or the yellow-brown of a lariat looped around a longhorn's neck, but the black-brown of cross ties, creosote-soaked, raised tobacco, rope range cattle, haul passenger baggage, and at night caress each other, lulled by the rustle of callus against callus. Wanderlust shines in Love's eyes. Pennies tipped to a Pullman porter drives him westward to country hardly held in history. It's a grand sight to see a large herd of several thousand buffalo on a stampede, all running with their heads down, their tongues hanging out like red flannel, snorting and bellowing. They crowd along, shaking the ground for yards around. This is the answer Love gives Silas as he feels the train's approach, standing at the edge of the track, on the edge of Milledgeville, looking on the rest of the world. So I did a lot of research for this book. I had a lot of fun doing a lot of research for this book, reading old newspapers and history books and talking to old folks and just wandering around my hometown and looking at historic sites and just having fun. In some of that research, I found mention of a couple of men who immigrated to Liberia in 1872 with their families. So this is like during Reconstruction. It's post emancipation, abolishment of slavery, and they still decided to move to Liberia, which got me interested in Liberia as a colony and then a nation that we founded in Africa. And also interested in trying to figure out why these men would leave America after slavery to go to Africa. In some of the research I did, I found out that one of the men came back. His name was Sandy Ganaway, which I think is an awesome name for somebody who goes away and comes back. And I was like, he has to have a poem. And I found out, at least I think I understand why he came back. There was an article in the paper, him talking a little bit about it, and there's an article from this younger guy. So Sandy was in his 70s when he left to go over there. And, this other guy, Alan Yancey, was like 24. And Alan was all gung-ho for Liberia. And I think Sandy was like, I'm too old to be changing my ways at this point. I think that's what was going on with him. So I wrote a poem about his coming back. Sandy Ganaway returns, 1874. Broke in New York and trying to get home, old Sandy Ganaway, older than Milledgeville by a couple of years, wants to get back to where he'd been freed after being owned before being born. Home, Georgia. He's seen Africa, and Liberia in nearly every way did not agree with the old man. Recognized faces, but didn't know the natives like folks back home. And never took a liking to the food or the way the light shone. Liberia created for those folks, freed after being owned before being born. And old Sandy Ganaway, never embraced as mother and long-lost son, returned home. It couldn't hold him the way the land of his fathers, owners and owned, held on. Where old Sandy Ganaway can conceive of dying as each and every man must, is the land he knows like his wife's arms. Where does home come from? The same place as race? Man is always inventing things, such as nations like Liberia and America, where Sandy was freed after being owned before being born. So this book is a lot about trying to figure out what home means and traveling in the meantime and migrating. And in 2003, I moved to Bemidji, Minnesota, which was like the best thing in my life, actually. It's so awesome. And yeah, I don't need, you guys are the home crowd. I can just read this poem. Penumbra. Penumbra. Over the clerk's shoulder, out the window, framing little old Bemidji, Minnesota, 9 guys, all knees, legs, and ease, glide by on bicycles, occupying the frame 2 at a time, pedaling along the sidewalk on Paul Bunyan Drive. Each of them black, and with me we make up almost 1/16, like a measure in carpentry or miscegenation of the county's black population. Trying to balance the equation, my question looking for an answer. Family reunion? My long-lost cousins? In this folktale, I flash back to my walk yesterday along the old Indian Trail. Brown with leaf litter now that the snow has gone. By the lake, now brown and fluid. 9 coots swim along the lake shore, paddling, gliding with grace, harmony of the firmament. Dignified black birds with white bills, a constellation or a mobile over a baby's crib and the baby's reaching. Reminds me of ducks falling in line at the carnival shooting gallery, like that guy who shot his specimens with a gun, toppling with a ding, like the game show right answer, who is John James Audubon? And Eureka, I am displacement. When the guy in line behind me asks his girlfriend, did the whole basketball team have to ride their bikes today? Here in the far north of the Midwest, this is my shadow box life, framed by the window. So that was early days in Bemidji. I was trying to figure out where I was. And then later, I knew. It sounded differently than I intended it. So Sherry mentioned the Stegner Fellowship at Stanford. So I'm out at Stanford, Sean Hill from Bemidji at this point in my life. And I meet Arnold Rampersad, who teaches there. He's the editor of the Collected Langston Hughes. And he teaches there, and I was like, I'm going to go to your office and like meet this guy. Like, yeah, hey, what's going on? He's like, hey, what's going on with you? I'm like, I'm from Bemidji. He's like, you're from Bemidji? That's cool. You need to write a poem titled Bemidji Blues. Which, of course, that's what he would say, right? He's the editor. He edited links and he uses book audience. So I was like, yeah, okay, I'll do that. Arnold Rapper said. Several years later, I finally get around to doing that. I'm like, so Bemidji Blues for Arnold Rapper said. Shadows bluing the snow, the pines and mine bear the cast of a kestrel's blue-gray crown. I note as I find my way about this town. Blues here more likely the Nordic eyes kind than the blue-black of some black folk back home. Here, so many lakes reflect the sky's blue dome. Some summer days, skim milk blue tints wind-blown whitecaps. Blues an adjective, verb, and noun, and the color of the world when I pine because she's gone, leaving too much wine and time. Blue shadows on the snow, mine and the pines. For the tall man, his blue ox, and now me, home is Bemidji. Though the blues here around more the cast of a kestrel's blue-gray crown than the blue-black of my cousins back home. So I was talking earlier today about a poem from this book titled June 1920, and it's about the lynching that took place in Duluth. And it's a poem that I wrote, I don't know, like 2005 or something, and in a workshop, because we were talking about things that happened in workshops and people talking about your poems. I was told that the poem wasn't angry enough. And so after a few years, I wrote another poem. I'm not sure if it's exactly angry, but it was infused with maybe a little more emotion, less distant. And lately, occasionally, I just sort of, unbeknownst to me what's going to happen, I start reading the poem and I start crying. So I'm just going to let you know that that might happen. All right. A photograph taken in Duluth. My grandmother says, beg pardon, when she hasn't heard what you've said, or is certain you can't have meant what she heard, like, I think the moon must have squinted at the dim light of the gas lamp post and the 3 men that hung from it. What I mean is, 3 men, black, in town with the circus, accused of the usual lynch law crime, were chosen from 6 and dragged from jail one by men who formed a mob, propped up by thousands of bystanders who didn't join in with the hoisting of these men up the lamp post for allegedly violating a white woman, of course, but registered approval with fists and feet while they made way for the black men, or didn't stomp the hand or foot of the woman or man next to them. So 3 beaten bodies violently shook, shuddered, sputtered blood on those close by, and came to rest. My grandmother says, hush, when she's heard what you've said and doesn't want to believe it. But I have a photograph, proof of what happened in Duluth. For that, I must say, thank you kindly. That's how my grandmother always says it. To a photographer from just across the bay in Superior, Wisconsin, on hand with the thousands of other souls crowding downtown Duluth that June evening. I know he didn't take it from me. My grandmother says, have mercy, when she's heard a burdensome truth, such as the photograph was soon made into a postcard that sold quite well in local retail outlets as a memento. My grandmother didn't know these men. She wasn't born yet. but doesn't need to be shown this photograph to know the crowd of white faces staring into the searchlight. Some lean forward and stretch their necks to make certain they're in the picture. One smiles while Elias Clayton's body lies face down at his feet. Hung so high they had to cut him down to be in the shot. And Isaac McGee and Elmer Jackson hang with their necks stretched, heads lolled to the side, faces turned as if they should be the ones bearing the shame or regret. This photo isn't necessary for my grandmother to know that this happened and can still happen. And that's why my grandmother sighs and says, "Hush." I actually thought I was going to make it through that time. I got to figure that one out. Maybe it's time for something totally different. So, 4 years ago, I moved to Alaska, Fairbanks, Alaska, with every intention of only going for 1 year. Yeah. I wrote this poem, "The Harmony of the Firmament." It's like this weird thing that I'm kind of fascinated by, so it shows up every now and again. Musica Universalis. It's sort of mathematical, musical metaphor for talking about the orbits of the planets and how those things have a certain harmony and balance. I just kind of think it's kind of cool. At any rate, so Musica Universalis in Fairbanks. Each night, this 21st century frontier town settles enough for me to hear the thrum and hiss in my ears, my tinnitus, which I choose to think of as the harmony of my firmament, all so far away, like the whoosh and hiss from Nana's gas heater that warmed the winter-chilled bedroom in Georgia while she got the skillet sizzling with country-cured ham in the kitchen. My refrigerator occasionally wakes this hour to clear its throat and rumble on over the sounds in my ears. And some nights I get out of bed to go stand under the generosity of stars here. I've decided that must be the collective noun for all the stars in one's gaze, as it must also be for any number of scars. The way we refer to a flock of starlings as a murmuration. I stand there and use my hand to shade my eyes from the streetlights to better see the stars. Our new light competes with the old, the way the clamor of our fleets in this age after sales is said to interfere with the songs of whales. Here I sometimes see the aurora borealis, silent, which seems impossible, like the end of the world, for what we know of light in the sky, lightning, and its often not far off companion, thunder, seems to say something will always follow. Some say the northern lights sizzle, an impossibility, a synesthetic weaving of the senses, exalting this light, or a lark, like the bird, which we call an exaltation when in numbers great or small. More than a handful, the way a friend used to count lovers when we were younger, told me he was on to the second hand. Love, while a lark, still handled carefully in those days. I should drive out of town to view these lights against the sky, black as a raven. They often fly in pairs or groups. a conspiracy, a storytelling, an unkindness of ravens. All right, one last poem. So, so yeah, I now have an 8-month-old son. Yay! Yeah, yeah, yeah. He's awesome. So, after the first ultrasound, the one where you go and it's just like, it's a heartbeat. See that? I was like, I, 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 I wrote this poem. I couldn't not write this poem. I was like, I have to write this thing now. I can't get on with my life without like some words, some language attending to what I just experienced in my life. So, hello. Actually, it's hello 03/02/2015. She, being the midwife and your mother's longtime friend, said, I see a heart. Can you see it? And on the gray display of the ultrasound, there you were as you were, our nugget. In that moment, becoming a shrimp or a comma, punctuating the whole of my life, separating its parts, before and after. A shrimp in the sea of your mother, and I couldn't help but see the fast beating of your heart translated on that screen and think and say to her, to the room, to your mother, to myself, it looks like a twinkling star. I imagine I'm not the first to say that either. But unlike the first moments of my every day, which is every moment after this one, the new of seeing you was the first, deserving the definite article, moment I saw a star at once so small and so big, so close and getting closer every day, I pray.